as a barrister at Four Pump Court Chambers, which is the chambers that does mainly commercial law. I think I'll kind of maybe start by just explaining what a barrister is, just in case anyone's not aware, because I realise it is quite a confusing profession, not really discussed that often. But essentially, it's a type of lawyer, and the two kind of types of lawyer you will hear about are, on the one hand, a solicitor, and on the other, a barrister. And I think the main differences between the two are largely that a barrister will generally represent you in court if you have a claim, whereas a solicitor will sort of handle all the matters leading up to court. So they'll do more of the client handling, and then the barrister will take on the case and go into court and address the judge. And yeah, just to explain how I sort of went down that route, I studied English literature at university. I went straight to university from sixth form, and I really wanted to study English at the time. It was what I did at A-level. I really enjoyed it, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And then during my second year at university, I decided to look into studying law, and sort of the routes that I could go down for a legal career. And I started sort of just going into court. So pretty much anyone is allowed to go into court, and in most cases just watch what's happening during court proceedings, which is something I'd really recommend doing if it is something you're interested in. I would literally go to the Durham Crown Court that was really near where I lived at university, and just go in and watch a trial in action, watch cross-examination, see the advocates presenting things to the judge. And that was how I sort of realised that was what I really wanted to do. I really liked the idea of having this function as part of the justice system, and the advocacy element as well, like being able to present things in court to a judge, really appealed to me. So after that, I started doing some work experience. I did what's called mini pupillages, which is where you essentially go and spend 2 or 3 days at a chambers, which are places where barristers work, and you usually sit with one or more barristers, just watch them go about their day to day. You might go into court with them, or you might just sit with them in their office, read through some of the cases they're doing, and discuss the cases with them. So I did quite a few mini pupillages over the course of sort of my final years at university, just to really establish which area of law I wanted to practice in, because the areas are quite different. So my chambers largely specialises in commercial law, with a focus on shipping, technology and construction. Commercial law is essentially just contracts, so it's agreements between two different parties, and then we essentially deal with what happens when that agreement goes wrong and the parties no longer have the same view on what they've agreed, and they're trying to sue each other. So that's the kind of type of law I generally do. You can also go into family law, which is things such as divorce and child protection work. You can also go into criminal law, or there's also a general civil practice where you could be doing things like personal injury claims if someone's been involved in a road accident, for example. So there's all these sorts of areas, and I think when looking into the area I wanted to do, I was thinking a lot about things I wanted to do day to day, as well as obviously just whether I was academically interested in that area of law. So in criminal law, for example, you will tend to be in court very frequently. So if you really enjoy the sort of drama of the advocacy, if you want to be like that guy with Suits, sort of, shouting at the judge, putting your points forward, criminal law is a really good area to go into. How I think personally I would struggle with the fact that you have to turn up to court with very little preparation, meet the witness on the day, read through the case on the day, and then go straight into court. That sort of off the cuff advocacy I personally would find very difficult and stressful, which is why I was more attracted to the commercial law route, where on a practical level you get a lot more time to prepare for your cases. You'll have a lot of discussion with your clients, with solicitors, leading up to your actual appearance in court. So from that perspective, I find that a lot more pleasing, having the time to prepare your case and actually set out some solid arguments before the judge. So that's sort of how I ended up choosing my area of law. I then obviously had to do something in order to have studied law. So at the end of my English literature degree, I did 2 years at Cambridge University. At that time, they were one of a few universities that offered a 2-year law degree if you had already if you'd already completed 1 degree. You can also do something called the Graduate Diploma of Law, which you might have heard of, the GDL, which essentially changes your original degree, and it could be any degree. I've met people who've done biology and maths and then gone on to do the GDL, and it changes that degree into a law degree. So then you can then pursue a vocational career in law, whether that's as a solicitor or as a barrister. If you're looking to be a barrister, you then have to complete something called, I'm not sure actually what it's called now, but it's usually just referred to as the bar, but they change the name every year. When I did it, it was called the Bar Practical Training Course. I think it may now have changed to just the Bar Training Course. But essentially, that is a year where you learn how to draft the various documents that you need in order to either bring or defend a claim in court or prosecute if you're doing criminal law. And you also learn, most importantly, the skills of advocacy. So, for example, how you can present your case persuasively to a judge, how you will structure your arguments, and how you will deal with witnesses and questioning those witnesses, whether that's your own witness or cross-examining a witness on the other side in order to undermine your opponent's case. So you learn all of that in bar school, and if being a barrister is the right career for you, then you will find that really fun. I really enjoyed actually a lot of bar school, as it sort of made me realise how much closer I was coming to my career. And during the year when I was studying bar school, I applied for what's called Pupillage, which is essentially another year of training, but you are paid for it. And at the end of that year, the chambers at which you undertake your pupillage can choose whether or not to accept you as what's called a tenant, at which point you become a full member of chambers, and you're then able to take on cases in your own right, and you then earn money directly from clients. So yeah, so I applied for pupillage. It is quite a lengthy procedure, and obviously fairly stressful, but I think no more so than many other careers, for example, in finance or and many other careers where you have to go through a kind of stressful application, paper sift, and then interview process. And I think it's really just about practicing being in interviews, doing mock interviews, and eventually you sort of get there. And I applied to a variety of chambers, usually focusing on ones where I'd done work experience, or where I've heard of the cases they'd done, or where they were doing areas that I was particularly interested in. So the chambers that I ended up at, for Pump Court, specialised in technology, which I became really interested in during the course of my law degree. I find it a very sort of interesting and innovative area of law, so that's sort of what made me focus on this chambers. And then we get to the sort of stage where I'm at the moment, which is pupillage, and as I said, that's 1 year of paid training. And what I will do is I sit with 3 different supervisors, the first from October till December. I'm now sat with my second supervisor from January until March, and then my final supervisor from March to August, when they make a decision on whether they would like to keep me on as a member of chambers. Your pupil supervisors are generally fairly senior barristers in chambers who have had around 10 to 15 years of experience, and you will kind of spend time sat in their office with them, helping them with any cases they've got on, and they'll usually give you things to read through. You will go and sit with them when they go and do hearings, for example, and also to client conferences, so you can really learn exactly what you will be doing when you eventually qualify. And the point where I'm just coming up to now is what's called the second 6 of pupillage, the second 6 months, at which point I'm allowed to take on my own cases in my own right. These will be very minor cases, thankfully. Obviously, every case is important, but they will be not of huge value in any case, and they are just to sort of help me get used to being in court and addressing judges and dealing with witnesses. And so I'll be doing sort of those cases up until the tenancy decision, at which point then I will either stay on in chambers or possibly move to a different chambers, depending on how that pans out. But yeah, so that sort of brought everything up to kind of present day. I don't know, Lucy, if you had any questions.
I just wanted to say, anyone questions, as you have them, please just pop them in the chat and I will pick those up. Thank you. I have already learnt a lot, because that was brilliant to actually explain what it all means and how it all works, because it can be a little bit confusing as to all the different kind of terminology. There is a lot of lingo, isn't there, in the law world, so actually so helpful to get that broken down and in terms of how it works. So thank you for that.
And if anyone has any questions about anything I said that didn't, because I was trying to sort of put it in normal terms, but I'm so used to just speaking obviously with other barristers, so obviously don't realise sometimes.
But there's a straightforward question to start with. How do you, is it difficult to kind of get a handle on all that language, or does it come quite naturally once you're working in the world and spending time doing it? And
yeah, I think honestly, even when you're trying to apply for pupillage, you end up being so surrounded by, because you're doing all this research, you're chatting with other bar school students about it, so you just end up picking it all up, I think, quite quickly.
Becomes second nature after a while.
Yeah.
Well, looks like we've got a few questions coming in, just waiting for them to appear in the chat. So are there any key skills or kind of character attributes that you think are particularly important? So you talked about, obviously, as that you thought that going into something more like criminal, where you'd have to pick it up very quickly, you know, you've sort of recognised that about yourself. But I mean, do you have to be very outgoing? Do you have to be really good at reading, or can all of that be developed and trained?
I think it's maybe more about what you enjoy, I would say, because if you don't enjoy something, I think you'll really struggle to sort of get used to it. So yeah, I should say, actually, in my sort of area of law, it is a lot of reading. And so if you're someone who kind of hates the thought of sitting there with a mound of documents, a commercial barrister career probably won't be that fun and enjoyable. I think that is something that you can get used to, because there is a lot of reading involved in a law degree as well. But if you're really not enjoying it, then you're not going to have a very fun career, I think, is basically the answer. In terms of kind of other skills for a barrister, I think outgoing is probably one used quite often, and possibly sort of independent as well. So this was another element that I didn't quite know how to weave into my introduction, but you are self-employed as a barrister, as opposed to, for example, a solicitor who is usually employed as part of a firm. And so that means that you are kind of responsible for your own work. You get paid by the clients on the basis of the work you've done, and essentially the buck stops with you. So I think you have to be prepared for that responsibility of, you know, if something goes wrong, you will be responsible. Obviously, your chambers will always help you, and as long as you've behaved honestly and done your best, essentially, it will be fine. But I think if, you know, that sort of level of responsibility is terrifying, then yeah, it's maybe not the career to go down.
Yeah, fair enough. Maybe think again. Again, that's something I don't think I knew. So, okay, we've got lots of questions now. So what made you decide that you prefer to be a barrister rather than a solicitor?
Yeah, I think this is literally a question I got in so many interviews. It's a classic interview question. I think I actually did work experience with solicitors' firms as well, which I would really recommend, even if you sort of are set, you know, you see a barrister in court and you think that is what I want to do, I don't want to be a solicitor at all. I would really recommend doing some work experience. just to kind of see and check that is, and then you have a good example to show in an interview as well as to why you don't want to be a solicitor. And I think for me, the sort of independence of being a barrister is what attracted me to it. Although it is sort of a double-edged sword, as I said, you have that responsibility element, and you also have that really nice feeling that all the work that you've done is to your credit. And when you've helped a client, you will get direct credit for it. You'll be able to put forward your own ideas always, and they will be used. I think that's really valuable. And then the other element is the advocacy. I enjoy kind of presenting arguments, both written and in court as well, because a lot of kind of what you do in my area of law is written advocacy, which is sort of just writing arguments on paper. It's essentially like writing an essay, but in a very kind of forceful way, and to resolve something for a real person, which I think is quite rewarding.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we've got, can I ask the pros and cons of doing a law degree versus an LPC?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I went down the route of a 2-year law degree because I was quite academically interested in law, and I think if you are interested in learning about it from an academic perspective, it's really good to do. Another pro is that you get to do extra optional modules that someone who does the law transfer course, the GDL, doesn't have the chance to do. They do the sort of 7 basic modules that you need to do in order to become a lawyer. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but they're essentially seven core modules that you have to do, which we do on the bar, kind of not the bar track, the GDL. If you choose to do a law degree, you get to do some extra modules as well. So if you have an idea of sort of what area of law you're going into, it's a really good chance to explore that further. So I did modules in international law and international commercial law, which sort of is quite involved in what I'm doing now. And actually those extra modules have already been quite helpful to have had now that I've started kind of my career and started Pupillage. The downside is obviously it's a year longer. It is slightly more competitive to get on, and it is more expensive as well. You can apply for funding for it, which is maybe something else I could go into, but it's a whole other area. There's lots of kind of scholarships and things available for further training, which you definitely should take advantage of, because there's a lot going around, to be honest. if you need funding for further education, like, don't worry about it. You will be able to sort of apply for that, and that is available. But yeah, it is more expensive to do the 2-year and longer time, and I don't think it makes a great deal of difference. So, you know, my co-pupils, so the other people at my chambers, did the GDL. He did English literature like me, and then just did the 1-year transfer. So it's, you know, it's sort of much of muchness. But if it's something you genuinely want to do, you want that extra year, and you want that sort of ability to learn even more about different areas of law, then it's a really good opportunity.
Well, that's great, and useful to know about the funding, certainly.
Yeah.
Be a concern. Another question around GDL. So if you're doing a GDL from a different degree at university, is it a separate application for it with different requirements? For example, grades or results from uni, presumably.
Yeah. So there is. Trying to remember the app, because I actually didn't do the GDL application process, but it is all online, and it's similar to UCAS, but you have to put in your predicted grades and then I think confirm with your final grade from university. From memory, I think it's a 2-1 that you're required, but I could be wrong, and that would also depend on which law school you decide to apply to as well.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. Do different areas of law have different pay scales?
Yes, essentially, and I think without sort of, I would never suggest that you should only do a job based on the kind of income that you'll be earning. But I think in terms of the difference between them, it is important to know, and particularly for criminal law, is not very well paid. And I think to the point where practitioners at the lower level in the criminal sphere are sometimes struggling to get by. So that is sort of something to remember, I think, because it does have an impact on your lifestyle. There are kind of ways around it. I think you could probably teach as well at a law school alongside doing a criminal practice. If that was something you would really want to pursue. And obviously, as you get more experience, the pay will go up. But yes, criminal law is quite poorly. I think it's sort of a trajectory up to commercial law tends to be towards the higher end, purely because the clients have a lot of money, so which seems quite unfair, really. But yeah, that's sort of how it tends to work.
And that's a very good one. Is work slowing down in law with legal aid being withdrawn?
So so with legal aid being withdrawn, that is what has had a big impact on the sort of income that criminal practitioners earn, because legal aid is in the legal sphere. And unfortunately, it doesn't mean that there are less cases to be tried purely because there isn't the funding available for it. So there are still cases, they're just either being handled by underpaid barristers, or they are going ahead with people not being represented, which is equally problematic. So actually, one thing that I think I will probably do when I can be on my feet in my own right is sort of go along to, I know a lot of the other younger barristers do that, is go along to the courts and just see if there's anyone stood outside looking like they might need representation and offer to represent them for free. Is good experience for young barristers, and obviously it's really important to help people. So that's, and I know there's a lot of charities where barristers will volunteer their time to represent people. But yeah, that is the main impact of legal aid, is that people who, the withdrawal of legal aid is that people who might otherwise have had representation cannot have representation because they simply can't afford it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely quite a significant challenge, isn't it? Okay, so back to school. What subjects other than English literature did you take at A-level?
So I did history and Latin and French AS. But honestly, if you're going to study law, I don't think it makes a great deal of difference. Kind of what subjects you've done is probably useful to have had one or two essay subjects, because you do have to write a lot of essays during a law degree. But equally, I've met people who studied maths and science, and actually, if you've studied science, then there's an opportunity to go into IP law, which is an area of law that focuses on like very technical elements like patents and new inventions and things like that. So it's usually quite useful to have had a science background for that. But for all other areas of law, it really doesn't matter. Yeah.
That's good to know. Really interesting as well. I feel like I've heard other people who work in law saying, you need to look at what you love and what you're interested in, and that's the route to go down for your academic study. How competitive is the bar?
So I assume this is for sort of applications for pupillage. Yeah.
I guess so, yeah. If you want to clarify, feel free. If not, then yeah, let's go with how competitive.
I didn't know whether it was sort of like we're all at war with each other constantly. Which we suppose we are in court, but yeah, it's very friendly outside of court. But yeah, I think in terms of applications, there are some quite scary statistics which I terrified myself with during the application process, where you hear about people, applying year after year and not being able to get in. But I think sometimes those need to be taken with a pinch of salt, because those statistics are based on a lot of people who don't put in genuine applications as well and just sort of fire them off. So it's never good to sort of focus too hard on that. That said, I think it is a fairly competitive sort of career to get into. I think you need to have done the work experience, and you need to have good good results from university or otherwise good academic achievements. I think in order to sort of stand out from other candidates. Yeah, I think that's my sort of main point on it. It's definitely not as hard as people make it seem sometimes, but it is competitive.
And one thing I would say on that point is we do have a considerable amount of experience in the alumni world. In these applications, people exactly like Katy who have put themselves forward to support fellow alum particularly, and so far that support has very often been around applications actually. So we've seen it in a number of different career areas. You talked about finance earlier. We've had really great examples of people being supported through assessment centres and written applications, funding applications, all that kind of thing by other people within the wider community who perhaps have been through that. So once you get out there and into the world, we can always find some help and support for you at these pinch points where you're going through applications and things like that. So you are fortunate that you have a very in-depth knowledge from all parts of the community. Where have we got to? Right, location. Why did you choose London for your pupillage rather than any other cities?
Yeah, so this was largely dependent on my area of law. So I knew I wanted to practice commercial law, and at the moment there is a much higher concentration of commercial chambers in London. I do actually wish it was different. I wish there were more in Manchester and Liverpool, and there are some very good sets in both Manchester and Liverpool that do practice commercial law, and there's just far fewer of them. So I sort of chose London, and from that point, I sort of chose that quite early on. So I did my bar course here, and I now have a sort of a circle of friends and things. So I think I probably will sort of stick with London now that I've sort of formed a base here. But yeah, it was largely initially due to my choice of practice area. I think if you also wanted to go into for example, human rights, it would probably make more sense to be in London. Although, as I say, there are good chambers sort of in the north, and also like Birmingham, sort of in all the regions there are good sets outside of London. But yeah, it was for my practice area. I thought it was best to focus on London.
Yeah, great, makes sense. And are there any age requirements for work experience in different areas of law?
Okay, I think in terms of age requirements, I think sometimes for some of the work experience I have described, they require you to be at a certain level of your education. So for certain mini pupillages, I know they want you to have at least started studying law, which is obviously quite far in the future for many of you. But I think they sort of do that on the basis that they don't feel like you will get much out of their work experience process if you haven't at least had some insight into law. That said, there are schemes I know for people at sixth form level or early on in their university career as well. And there are kind of ways of you can get in touch with barristers, for example, or chambers, and just ask if you could come in for a day and do a sort of unofficial mini pupillage, not their sort of proper one that is for people currently studying law. I think that is a really good way to sort of get work experience kind of before you've started doing it. Or as I say, you can just turn up at court. I think until I did this for the first time, I was really scared about doing this, but it's, you know, hearings are meant to be public. So if you go to your local court, you just speak to the person on the desk and ask kind of what hearings are on that day, and then you can just decide to just pop in and watch one.
That's such a good tip, and that definitely would be one of the things I was going to ask in terms of tips for accessing work experience. That's, you know, that's kind of front of mind and something that's always a challenge. So that's something really easy that you can do anytime. So definitely is a really good idea to have a look at. No more questions at the moment, so just going to give you a couple of minutes. If you've got any more questions, now's the time to pop them in the chat. I'm sure, Katy, would you mind if anyone had anything afterwards that we could perhaps put you in touch and you answer any questions?
No, not at all. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. One from me that I always want to know, I think, I suppose, and it's going to vary every day, but what's a normal day like? What's today been like? What have you had to do?
Sure, yeah. Today was sort of a typical kind of commercial barrister, I think, day, which was full of reading. So yeah, I think that does tend to make up most of my week, but that will change, I think, especially when after April, when I'm going into court myself, so that might end up being more of me traveling to court, or actually more likely doing an online hearing, because hearings are still mainly online at the moment, particularly in my area. But yeah, generally I will come in chambers. I work in my supervisor's office, so all the barristers in chambers have individual offices, and I work on a desk in my supervisor's. And sort of the thinking behind that is that I can learn from what he's doing during the day. So if he has a call with solicitors or with clients, I can sort of listen in and get tips on that sort of side, that client handling side. I can read through papers and ask him any questions I have about the papers, and he will also occasionally ask me to sort of research points for him or look into a particular thing that I can help him with as well. So that will sort of be my typical day. And then if, for example, he has a hearing, then I'll go to the hearing with him, sit in on that. Yeah, that's sort of it.
Great, fantastic. And what would you say was the best thing about being a barrister as so far on your experience, and what's the worst, do you think?
I think this is a difficult one because I haven't actually experienced it myself yet, but I think resolving an issue for someone would be a really good feeling, which I hopefully will get to soon. But yeah, I think, because I think I've heard from my supervisor and other barristers in chambers that sometimes even if you go to court and you represent someone and you lose the case for them, they're still grateful that you went along and put their case forward, and they're just quite happy to have the issue behind them. So I think sort of that element of being able to solve something and them to have, it's like being, you know, sort of like an agony aunt or something, but with law, you sort of are able to put forward a solution that generally puts someone's mind at rest, or even gets, you know, sort of a good outcome and justice for them. So I think that's, yeah, that's probably the best thing. And did you say what was the worst thing as well?
Yeah, any major downsides or any bits you really hate?
I think the pressure is probably the main thing, and as I said, it's something you've got to sort of get used to because you are independent, and you even feel it a little bit during pupillage, because obviously during this year they're deciding whether or not to take you on as a member of chambers, so everything you do has this sort of little underlying pressure, which is good because it makes you a better person, but it is also, you know, fairly stressful. And then I know that my first time in court representing someone, I will be under a lot of pressure to sort of do the best I can for them. So yeah, I think that's probably the most challenging aspect.
Do you have any coping mechanisms to kind of, you know, what's the outlet to help you cope with that?
I think actually during my bar course, I used to listen to music. I used to have like a hype song before I went in. But I don't know if that's a good idea to do that in court when you're supposed to be sort of making sure your witness is okay. To just put your headphones in. So I think probably just remembering that you really are there to just do your best. And, you know, some cases are just not winnable, like the arguments and the facts just aren't on your side. And just kind of staying calm, which is easier said than done. But yeah, just remembering that you're there to do your best for your client, and that the judge is sort of there to do that too. The judge is just trying to find a resolution. They're not trying to test you as the barrister. They're trying to reach a just outcome for both of the parties involved in the case. So,
yeah, no, that makes sense. And again, just some really incredibly practical advice there. So thank you. So it's absolutely invaluable to get that reality and just to, you know, to kind of really hear what it's like and advice and that kind of thing. So appreciate that. Well, I think we will wrap up because I've got no further questions coming in the chat. As I say, if anyone wants to contact me, by all means, with any questions, and I can pass those through. We will also share this recording for anyone who came sort of halfway through, or anyone who wasn't able to be here. But for now, just thank you so much, Katy, for giving us some time at the end of probably a very busy day, and hopefully you can go home and relax a bit now. And we really do appreciate it. And just some thank yous coming in from those who are listening in. So thanks very much.
No problem.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. And yeah, do feel free, anyone, to contact me with any further questions. Very happy to be contacted.